Gardeners, welcome back to another great Cultivate event. We are really excited you join us today. My name is Muriel Lanford. I'm a Bexar County Master Gardener, and I will be your host for today's workshops. For those of you who don't know, Cultivate is an educational seminar that we hold twice a year. And whether this is your first time attending or if you're a repeat attendee, we're glad you're here. This is our 17th Cultivate. And believe it or not, we have several individuals who have attended every one of our Cultivate events since its inception in 2017. We truly appreciate your interest. At this year's Cultivate, we have some great giveaways again. We're going to have a drawing held after the event tomorrow, and 4 lucky individuals will receive a $25 gift certificate from Rainbow Gardens Nursery. Every session you attend is a separate entry for these great prizes, so we hope you attend all of them. Also, after the last session today, you will receive an email with a link to a very brief survey from Bexar County Master Gardeners. Or if you prefer, we're going to have a QR code that links to the survey that will show after each session. And we ask that you please complete one survey for each session you attend. It will take you literally about a minute or two to complete, but that input from you is valuable. It's a tool that we will use to help us in planning future events for you. We'd very much appreciate your feedback. All right, that's it for the housekeeping items. With each Cultivate event, we try to introduce some new subjects, and we also bring back some old favorites. We have 3 wonderful guest speakers today, and tomorrow we'll have Bexar County Master Gardeners who will present. For those of you who don't know about the Master Gardener program, as Master Gardeners, we're actually part of the AgriLife Extension Service of Texas A&M, which is the community training and education arm of A&M University. Master Gardeners support Texas A&M AgriLife by providing research-based, unbiased, and locally relevant gardening and horticultural education. In fact, the BCMG homepage, our homepage, has extensive resources for you, and it's located under the gardening library on your website. You'll see it as soon as you go to our homepage. There are literally hundreds of publications on multiple horticultural topics for you to access at any time. You can find this at bearmg.org. Now, if you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We have a team of Master Gardeners located, standing by to answer questions. But if you have questions for the speaker, I'm going to ask those at the end of the presentation until we run out of time. But if we run out of time, don't worry. You can still contact us at cultivate@bearmg.org. Okay, let's get started. To kick off our first session, we have a huge treat for you again. If you attended last spring's event, or if you've been around gardening for any length of time, you know the name Greg Grant. And as I said last year, the most difficult thing about introducing Greg is trying to make his bio concise. So just a little bit. Greg is an award-winning horticulturist, writer, conservationist, bulb farmer, and 7th-generation Texan from Arcadia, Texas. That's a little dot on the map near Louisiana. And while Greg has authored multiple books, blogs, and magazine articles, his real job is actually the Smith County horticulturist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension in Tyler, Texas. So if you know David Rodriguez, our local county horticulturist, he's David's counterpart in Tyler. Greg holds a bachelor's degree in floriculture from A&M. He has a master's degree in horticulture from A&M and his PhD in forestry from Stephen F. Austin. You would recognize several of the popular plants that Greg has introduced to the horticultural world. In fact, you probably have some in your yard. He's traveled extensively, sharing his knowledge and his humor with plant and gardening enthusiasts, and he has a lifetime membership in multiple organizations. His awards that would literally take me too long to list, but just a few. He's been featured in Southern Living, Woman's Day, Texas Gardener, Neil Sperry's Gardens, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Dallas Morning News, the Houston Chronicle, and the San Antonio Express News, and that's just to name a few. So with that, Greg is going to download part of his massive horticultural knowledge to tell us why everything you know about gardening is wrong. I can't wait to hear this one, Greg. You're on. We just need your audio, Greg.
We're getting there.
All right. You're good to go.
All right. Thank you very much. And in the future, you can sum that up by saying Greg's an ADD horticulturist that couldn't hold a job. And that's pretty much what it amounted to. But I loved it all. And now I'm going to have to say we're all addicted to social media. And I listen to 3 hours of YouTube videos commuting every day. And so, yeah, you can see my title was a little bit of some clickbait there, obviously, inadvertently. And so I've adjusted a little bit because, you know, we all start knowing absolutely the same thing, which is nothing. And anybody that'll teach us, that's who we listen to. And I had lots of great mentors, lots of great teachers, and I'm sure you have too. And so, you know, I'm going to put wrong in quotation marks because in hindsight, I think what I learned was technically not correct or what I needed to know, and we're going to adjust that to what I learned. So I'm not placing any blame on you. I'll take all the blame for this, and I've been at it a long time now. First of all, for those of you that aren't old enough to remember, I was the county horticulturist in San Antonio for a fairly short period of time after Doug Welsh and before Calvin Finch, and so that's how long ago that was. I lived in San Antonio 3 different times. I love San Antonio, but of course I'm a seventh generation East Texan, so eventually I had to meander my way back home. I'd also worked at Lone Star Growers as director of research and development, and I was worked at the San Antonio Botanic Garden briefly as a horticulturist. But I started my life in love with horticulture. Here I am in kindergarten at 5 years old, playing a little Dutch boy, and I dreamed of having a tulip farm, literally. Read a book about George Washington Carver in fourth grade and decided I was going to be a horticulturist. Of course, went to Texas A&M, and I learned lots of stuff, and I enjoyed learning. But you know, in hindsight, I kind of wish it was taught to me differently, and I would like to teach people differently. And I've done a lot of teaching in my life. I'm a son of two uh, teachers, and I'm an educator myself, but I don't have that long before the end of life, and so I can see that I'm going to have to change some things. So let's start off by saying today we have access to wisdom, quote wisdom, from all over the world about gardening, and there's some good things about that because literally I learn stuff every day, and I enjoy learning. But if you're not careful, you can learn you can learn incorrect information from people that literally don't know what they're talking about, or things that are intentionally trying to mislead you. But also the fact that you have information from all over the world, well, we're not the same as all over the world. Matter of fact, all of Europe and the northern United States are in entirely different climates, so different gardening climate and so different in ecosystems. If they say good, for us, that means bad. And if they say alive, for us, that means dead. And so it's very difficult to listen to things that are exactly the opposite and gain any useful information. So most people, I teach my master gardeners, don't even pay attention to anything from the north in Europe. Now, you can be inspired by pictures, but the information is literally going to be completely wrong for you. So be careful on what you're getting off of internet and social media and the World Wide Web. Now, you know, grew up hearing things about wives' tales. Well, that's of course incorrect because there's just as many men spewing misinformation to gardeners as there are women. So we'll call them spouses' tales. And so a lot of things that I heard growing up were incorrect, and they didn't know it was incorrect. They weren't intentionally misleading me as a child gardener, but just cover a few things that I learned, and of course, realize that we hear a lot about fake news these days. Well, gardeners invented fake news, in my opinion, because we've been spewing poo for a long, long time uh, as truth because we didn't know any better. We didn't know how to explain it, and so don't think that misinformation is something new because a lot of our gardening experience is based on misinformation. For instance, I want to be a tulip farmer. Well, it turns out, well, you can grow tulips here, but I don't suggest it because we're looking at something produced on another continent, put on a boat or an airplane, shipped to the United States. We put it in the refrigerator for 3 months to trick it into blooming, and then we plant them out. And I remember one year in San Antonio when it got 100 degrees in February, and the tulips opened up and the petals fell off the same day. Well, that is way too much trouble, way too much input, way too much carbon footprint to grow something that's going to last that little of time. And it's just an annual, a very short-lived annual. And so people always say, well, can't I dig them up and refrigerate them? And I said, well, you can, but the problem is you got to air condition your yard for about 3 months in the spring, and that's generally cost prohibitive. I don't know how many of you saw the other day, just southeast of Laredo, set the hottest ever winter temperature for the United States of America at 106 degrees in February. And so having something come from a whole different climate where their summertime is equivalent to our springtime, it doesn't work for us. And so it doesn't matter that we know how to grow tulips. I can teach you how to. I remember in college we grew turf on um, concrete. I don't suggest that though. So just because we know how to do something doesn't mean we should do it. I grew up growing eating ribbon cane syrup, and I used to grow sugar cane for about 20 years to make syrup because my dad liked it. And a lot of the old timers say, "Would don't put chicken litter." A lot of chickens in eastern Texas poultry production. Don't put chicken litter on your vegetables or on your ribbon cane syrup, your sugar cane, because it'll make the cane syrup taste like poo. Well, that's wrong. Once the nutrients go into a plant, they're all the same uh, elemental compounds, so they don't partake flavor. And so that was just something that people didn't understand. And what they really didn't understand is every cultivar of sugarcane had a slightly different flavor and a slightly different color depending on the type of cane. Now, people in the grape vineyard world know that certainly, but the same thing works with sugarcane. So no, putting any kind of animal manure on your crop doesn't make it taste like that crop. Heck, in third world countries, they use human poo on crops, so it doesn't change the flavor. So it's not sanitary, and certainly don't suggest that, but it doesn't change the flavor. And so I have my own chickens, and I use that chicken litter for lots of things, including vegetable crops, and it certainly doesn't make them taste like chicken or chicken litter. I was also told as a youngster, if you over fertilized your onions, you'd make all tops, all foliage, and no bulbs. And of course, that turns out it's not true. If you've ever sliced an onion to cook with, you'll notice there are rings in the onion, just like there are in any true bulb. Well, every one of those rings came from a leaf on that onion. So, in other words, the more onion leaves you made, the more rings in your onion. The bigger the onion leaves you made, the bigger the onion. It all had to do with day length. And so early gardeners didn't understand that those bulbs were growing when the days were short and bulbing when the days were long. And so they'd blame it on things like over fertilization or making all tops. Most of the time, it meant they were planted too late. They didn't have enough short days to make the tops. And the smaller the top, the smaller the onion. So it had nothing uh, to do with fertilizer or producing too much foliage. It had to do with day length. And my dad loves onions. I just planted him 3 bundles of onions of them, and he'll eat every one. He's OCD, so he'll report all through the spring and summer how many onions he has left, how many he's eaten, blah blah blah. And so, as a horticulturist that was raised by people that were non-gardeners, you got to find some way for them to tolerate you. And for my dad, it's producing onions for me. Another thing I was told is that you had to pull the soil away from the onions so they'd be able to bulb. If they didn't, they wouldn't bulb. Once again, they didn't understand that they weren't bulbing because they planted them too late and they didn't have enough short days. We grow short day onions in the South. I can assure you there is no bulb farmer in Noonday, Texas or Vidalia, Georgia going out there pulling the soil away from the onion. So as the onion bulbs, it pushes the soil away. And so once again, people didn't understand. They just looked at it and said, well, maybe I didn't pull the soil away, and that's why they didn't make any bulbs. Wrong. And so, many, many, many good gardeners. And if you're gardening in Texas, there's about 6 times a year that you plant different crops. So it all has to do with temperatures and day length and planting time of the year and what crop. And in the case of onions, what kind of onions you're growing. And of course, most of those in the United States all come as transplants from Dixondale farms in South Texas. Also, along that same line, people would say if you fertilized your tomatoes too much, you would make all foliage and no tomatoes. Well, no, that's not true. Matter of fact, if you don't fertilize your tomatoes a lot, you're not going to have enough foliage to produce tomatoes. So the more foliage you produce, the more tomatoes you make. And in hot Texas, you have to have foliage to keep those tomatoes from sunburning. What they didn't understand is there are different types of tomatoes that fall in categories between determinate varieties and indeterminate varieties. So the indeterminate varieties, which include a lot of the heirloom tomatoes, like you see pictured here, they don't have all tomatoes stop setting fruit when the temperatures get hot, say 88 plus degrees. And so once it's warm, they're not going to set any fruit. It doesn't have anything to do with how much foliage on there. It has to do with the temperature and the pollen. And so when you grow some of these heirlooms from the north in Europe, they only set a few blooms in the spring and continue blooming throughout the summer. They can't set during the summer here. So you end up with just a plant with a bunch of foliage and vines. and no tomatoes. And it has to do with temperature and the pollen and the type of tomato that you're growing. And so what we grow in the South are determinate varieties that set a whole bunch of blooms and a whole bunch of fruit at the same time. And of course, you see this is a picture from Von Ormy, Texas, south of San Antonio. And you see how much foliage you have on there. And you need all that foliage to one, protect all that fruit and to produce all that fruit. So all foliage on any plant is basically a solar panel producing energy for that plant. And so people didn't understand, and a lot of people don't understand the difference between determinate and indeterminate varieties. A number of years back, when I was a county horticulturist in Cherokee County, Texas, where they grow famous Jacksonville tomatoes, this gentleman had planted a tomato that Texas A&M had tested in trial. I think it was Merced. Doesn't exist anymore, but he said, you got to come out here and look at my tomatoes. And I said, well, I'm busy. He said, no, you don't understand. You have got to see these tomatoes. Well, he had never seen the type of fruit set, one that a determinate variety and an improved Texas A&M tested and trial variety. He said, it looks like somebody dumped buckets of tomatoes into each one of my tomatoes. And so here again, it's all about growing the right cultivar in the right climate. And you also hear, a lot of things you can add to the soil that are going to improve the production of different plants. And one thing you'll hear about with tomatoes is if you'll add Epsom salt, it'll make your tomatoes grow better. Well, there's something called the Liebig's law of minimums that you've got to have the right amount of everything to grow something correctly. And if any one of those things is missing, then it's not going to grow correctly. Well, having a magnesium deficiency is pretty rare, but unless you have a soil test that shows you that you're short on magnesium, then you're not going to get any results from adding Epsom salt to your tomatoes. So you shouldn't have just a blanket statement to add any micronutrient to any plant. So unless a soil test shows you that you're missing that, then you're not going to get any results. So no, not everybody needs to add Epsom salt to their tomato plants before they plant them. And I never do, by the way. My little Granny Ruth was just as sweet as can be, and she was a good gardener. But like a lot of people, she planted one garden a year. A lot of people are familiar with planting a spring garden, and she insisted that you plant it on Good Friday, and all your crops were going to be blessed, and you're going to make good vegetables. Well, the problem is Good Friday is like Goldilocks. It's just right for some crops. It's too late for some crops and too early for some crops. So I mentioned we have about 6 times a year that we plant vegetables in Texas and the South. Well, that means you would only be correct on Good Friday 1/6 of the time. And so, of course, a lot of things aren't going to do good. So we can't just plant on one single day all of our crops. A lot of people complain they can't grow cilantro and they can't grow parsley. Well, that's because they're planting them the same time they're planting the same way with dill. Planting them the same time they're planting your tomatoes and your peppers and your cucumbers, and it's too late for the cool season crops like dill and cilantro and parsley, which all have to be planted in February and then again in September. And so I've been gardening my whole life, and you learn from experience, but at first you learn from people telling you. Luckily now we have access to all sorts of information from the Aggie Horticulture website, including the vegetable resources that has a page on every vegetable that you can produce in Texas. So that's a good place to start. I love bulbs, and my little Granny Ruth loved bulbs, and I love looking at those Dutch bulb catalogs. That's how I fell in love with the tulips. Well, you'll see a lot of information about how you need to use bone meal for your bulbs. Well, it turns out you don't need to use bone meal for your bulbs. The bulbs that are truly adapted to Texas don't require any fertilizer whatsoever. And so if you're fertilizing, whether it be bone meal or any blood meal or any fertilizer for that matter, what you're generally doing is just encouraging the weeds. And so I actually have a little bulb farm and a bulb trial where I grow bulbs for our annual Smith County Master Gardener bulb sale. And so you see my little farm there. Not one drop of fertilizer is ever added to that field. And so the bulbs that are adapted, and for San Antonio, you're looking at things like Grand Primo narcissus and oxblood lilies and Byzantine gladiolus. No, they don't need any fertilizer whatsoever, not bone meal or anything else. And I grow lots of bulbs in different meadows and pastures and flower beds and fence rows and around trees. And I grow as many bulbs as probably anybody in Texas, and none of them are fertilized, and so they don't need fertilizer if you're growing the right kind. Now, if you're growing a big flower daffodil or a tulip that barely knows how to grow here, possibly you might get some benefit from fertilizer. I honestly don't think so. So fertilizer is expensive these days. There are $100+ bags of fertilizer sitting out there at the big box stores right now, and so we don't need to fertilize anything that doesn't require it. I was brought up as an organic gardener. Matter of fact, the first book I ever owned was Rodale's Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening, and so you'll read things and hear things about planting marigolds to repel insects. Well, unfortunately, we have such hot climate in most of uh, our spring and summer in Texas, that marigolds are very susceptible to spider mites. And so, spider mite, not technically an insect, but it will attract spider mites. And if you put them out there with your tomatoes and roses and hibiscus and other things that are prone to spider mites, then you're just going to end up with a spider mite infestation that you would have never had. And so, you're not going to get any benefit from companion plants to your vegetables. Matter of fact, if you're not careful, you're going to attract an insect or a mite that you didn't want at all. And so what we found out years ago, Dr. Parsons and I, in San Antonio, if you plant your marigolds in the late summer going into fall, you don't build up those mite populations. And so if you bloom them for the fall and Day of the Dead and traditional days I have in Mexico, you don't get those spider mites. But if you plant them in the springtime going into summer, you're almost always almost guaranteed to get spider mites. Matter of fact, it's been so warm this year. I've already got spider mites on some plants, which is pretty amazing that it's hot enough for spider mites. This cool weather and moisture will generally discourage spider mites. I've lived in a garden in Dallas and College Station and San Antonio, and you often hear people think that and say that pine straw is the magic ingredients that makes azaleas grow in East Texas. Well, it's not. It just so happens that we have a lot of pine trees in East Texas, and we have a lot of pine straw. And pine straw is certainly a good mulch, but there's nothing magic about it. It doesn't make us have the ability to grow azaleas. Matter of fact, it's acidic soils and water that's not high in calcium and high in sodium that allow most of East Texans the ability to grow azaleas. And so there's no reason anybody in Dallas, Austin, San Antonio should be growing azaleas because they don't have the right soil and the right climate. But it's certainly not the pine straw, even though it's one of my favorite mulches. It's not the pine straw that does the trick. It's existing soils, it's the rainfall, it's closer to 50 inches a year, and it's sources of water, not from the Edwards Aquifer, not from the Carrizo Wilcox that have lower pH and no sodium in the water supply. My granny Ruth, excuse me, my grandmother Amanda, she used to argue with me that St. Augustine like shade, and it happens to be our only lawn grass that has any shade tolerance, but it doesn't like shade. And oh, she would argue till she was blue in the face. But I always tell my master gardeners when I'm teaching about turf grass or I'm teaching a lecture on turf grass, go to any St. Augustine sod farm in the United States and show me a tree. And so if it lacks shade, why would the professional farmer who has to make a living do it not be growing it in the shade? So certainly it likes full sun best. It just has the most shade tolerance of any of our lawn grasses in the South. But what people do, they put it under a magnolia or a cedar tree or a live oak, or they lock it in the closet and they wonder why it won't grow. So it's certainly not going to tolerate dense shade, and it's not going to prefer shade over sun. So the more sun you have, the better St. Augustine grass will do. Also used to hear growing up that if you water during the heat of the day, you're going to scorch your plants. Well, look how many times you have thunderstorms in the middle of a summertime, or you think about or a hurricane or a tropical storm coming through during the summertime. That's not going to scorch your plant. Look at the hot greenhouse when it gets really dry, or any nursery for that matter. They're going to water those plants as soon as they're dry. So I always tell gardeners, if you just crawled across the desert and showed up at my house in the middle of the day, and I told you, no, you're going to have to wait till this evening. I don't want to scorch your lips because you're too hot. No, it doesn't work like that. So if a plant's dry, water it ASAP. You're not gonna scorch it. Now, if your water hose is laying in the Texas sun and the water comes out at 150 degrees, yeah, you might fry a plant or your lips for that matter. But it's not the fact that water itself is scorching the plant. We're not going to talk about liming your lawn because people in San Antonio certainly don't have to lime your lawn because you're sitting on the solid limestone. But here in East Texas, we're often told that, and you can certainly grow a lawn in East Texas without liming. For that matter, you can grow a decent lawn without fertilizer. And I know the Soil Lab and the turf people have a fit if they hear me say that. But once again, fertilizer is so expensive now that we really do need to reserve it for those plants that have it. And for me, that would be annual bedding plants and vegetable plants. You can grow a lawn, you can grow a perennial border, you can grow shrubs, you can grow trees without additional commercially purchased fertilizer. And there are lots and lots of poor people all over the country, and lots of country people. Think about it. Prairies, existed with no fertilizer, just a natural recycling of nitrogen through the organic matter. And so you can grow a decent lawn. Now, maybe it's not quite as thick, maybe not quite as green, but you don't have to fertilize your lawn. And then, of course, there are a lot of people that literally think you've got to spray every weed and every insect in the lawn, or you're not going to have a good good lawn. Matter of fact, I hear this all the time. The weeds took over my lawn. No, your grass died and the weeds took over bare spots in your lawn. And we've really got to rethink what we think of it as weeds because most of the people that come into this office complaining about their lawns have a sprinkler system, they fertilize, they overwater, and they over apply herbicides, and they end up killing their lawn. And then, of course, there are weeds that'll pop in there. Well, of course, it's better to have anything green than bare dirt. And certainly, a lot of those weeds that are introduced that we have in our lawn, you think about clover and chickweed and henbit and dandelions, those are all from Europe, the same place that honeybees are from. And honeybees are in major decline all over the world, even though it's not a native bee. Those benefit from all those quote weeds. And so I really hesitate to recommend um, herbicides for people because most of them mess up and they end up killing their lawn or they kill their tomato plant or their neighbor's bedding plants or the petunias and whatnot. So, and pre-emergents are just really finicky and you got to know what you're doing, have the right timing. So I don't suggest homeowners use herbicides on their lawn. And guess what? I don't use herbicide on my lawn. And the same goes for insects. Early in my career, if people saw one bug, one spider, one tick, one flea, they'd treat the whole yard with diazinon or Durspan. Well, guess what? Before long, diazinon was in the Dallas-Fort Worth water supply, and now diazinon is completely banned from use. And so we don't need to kill everything. The far majority of insects are not anything harmful. Matter of fact, a great many of them are beneficial. So we need to develop more tolerance for both weeds and insects. Now, speaking of honeybees, we hear all the time that if the honeybee, it's in decline, well, if it dies off, civilization is in, life is going to end, we won't be able to produce any crops, it'll never be the same. Well, realize honeybees are not native to the United States. And so, maybe Europe falls off the map without honeybees, but we've got lots and lots of native bees here. And certainly they're important in pollination, and there are lots of beekeepers out there, and we all like honey, and it has its own uh, associations and lobby groups and whatnot. But honeybees are not the be all end all for Texas. Matter of fact, we have over 1,000 native bee species in Texas, and most gardeners can't name a single one except the non-native honeybee. And so we need to do a much better job of recognizing bees, learning bees, using non-naturalists, sharing that information with each other, and learn that every native plant has a particular, if it's an insect pollinator or bee pollinator, has generally a specific host-specific bee that pollinates that. And here, passion vine is a good example. That's the host plant for the Gulf fritillary butterfly, but it's a bee pollinated plant. And you see here, it's made for large bees, in that case, a carpenter bee, to slide up under there, get that pollen dusted on her back, and then let's move it on to the next plant. And so we need to learn about our native bees. In fact, it's not just bees that are having problems. We got some major issues going on all over Texas, all over the world for that matter. But in Texas in particular, we got 99% of our Texas blackland prairies are gone. 99% of our Texas coastal and our Cajun prairies in southeast Texas are gone. 99% of our original longleaf pine savannas, which came into East Texas, formerly 90 plus million acres, now down to a few. 90% decline in monarch butterflies. That's our Texas state insect. Only 10% of original shortleaf pine remains. That would be Tyler in Northeast Texas. 0.01% of our oak savannas remain in the U.S. That includes the post oak savanna all through central Texas. And 1 in 4 of our 4,000 different native bee species are imperiled. So we got super major issues going on all around us that we need to be cognizant of. We're all told, and we are told, and we teach people, you need to prune your roses at Valentine's Day and Labor Day. And certainly if you're going to prune them sometime around, it doesn't have to be on those days, but most of my gardening gets done on holidays. So I try to remember my gardening chores by the holidays, but certainly you don't have to. Matter of fact, studying roses there in San Antonio with Dr. Welch and Pam Purrier, many of the most beautiful roses I'd ever seen had never been pruned at all, and you literally walked under them. So there's one from downtown San Antonio. So there's no rule that says you have to prune your roses. That was all pretty much designed for modern hybrid tea roses. And so most of the old shrub roses, teas, Chinas, polyanthus, and even our modern shrub roses, not knockouts and drifts, those are pruned like shrubs. And some of them are great big shrubs, some of them are smaller shrubs, but they're just lightly sheared a couple of times a year. Don't have to be all that heavy, fancy pruning. And certainly a lot of our climbers like Peggy Martin and other ramblers, they don't get pruned till after they bloom. If you prune them before they bloom, they're not going to have any blooms on there. So we sometimes get really caught up in our real specific instructions and rules about gardening. And rules are made to be broken, and some of them don't apply it at all. And we're also taught early in my career that roses had to be sprayed every 7 to 10 days with insecticide, miticide, fungicide, and were fertilized multiple times a year. They were, of course, pruned heavily twice a year to an outward-facing bud. You'd count back to the first five-leaflet leaf, and that's where you deadhead them to. And you'd scrape the bud union every year when you plant them. You put Elmer's glue on the tips. I mean, very, very detailed instructions that nobody was going to follow. And certainly a modern rose garden like the Tyler Rose Garden might follow those principles, or at least used to, but homeowners, they don't have time for that. And you don't have to do all that. Matter of fact, a lot of the best roses that grow here don't need spraying at all. And so we have earth kind roses. We have, my mentor, Dr. Welch, and my late friend Pam Perger. They helped start the Texas Rose Roasters and a whole movement about growing roses that don't have to be sprayed with fungicides and miticide and insecticide. And Dr. George worked on the earth kind rose program, showing roses didn't have to be fertilized. And I know for a fact they don't have to be pruned with that heavy kind of pruning. And so we need to find the roses that are adapted here and grow those. And one that, ironically is not taught to people, but everybody does now. And you'll read that, removing the crepe myrtle seed pod will help them bloom better. Well, that would be a green developing seed pod the second the petals fell off, like any ever blooming plant. If you deadhead them, that will reduce the input into that seed and put it into more blooms. But everybody misinterpreted that. And before long, people out there pruning dead crepe myrtle seed pods off their crepe myrtles, which makes no difference whatsoever. You're not saving the plant any energy, and that's purely cosmetic. And we don't do it to any other plant that we go out there and prune off seed pods during the wintertime. And then unfortunately, it's just got totally out of control. Now, I'm old enough that I've lived through this phenomenon where crepe myrtles used to not be pruned like this. The first one I ever saw, I was a county horticulturist in San Antonio. It was in Laredo, Texas, and it swept across the entire United States for now where people are doing something they don't even know why they're doing it. It's just copycat now. So we're not teaching people to cut back crepe myrtles hard. Because let me tell you some reasons not to do it. It does make the blooms larger. You get fewer blooms, larger blooms, but it makes the stems floppy, so the blooms flop down. It makes them less cold hardy when you prune them heavily. It promotes crepe myrtle bark scale because the crepe myrtle bark scale, one, gets spread from tree to tree when you're pruning them. Also, it's attracted just like deer and rabbits and cattle like new, fresh, tender growth. Crepe myrtle bark scale will be on the new tender growth and not the old woody growth. It also makes them sprout more from the base. And so it makes sense if you cut a multi-trunk tree back, it's going to cause it to produce more sprouts because they want to be multi-trunk, and you're removing all those carbohydrate reserves, and the tree realizes I need to grow and make more leaves. And so then people complain about the sprouts, but they're causing the sprouts by cutting them way back. And of course, it's ugly. It's hideous, somewhere between hideous and atrocious. And so, but unfortunately, now we got people copying each other, and not one publication, not one article, not one extension specialist, not one arborist has ever told people to prune their crepe myrtles like that. But now they're just copycatting each other. And so the most beautiful crepe myrtles I've ever seen, and here's some in downtown San Antonio, never been pruned at all. And so we've got to be really careful in the gardening world that we want to be, and I teach master gardeners, and master gardeners can be guilty of this. We want to learn. And I was the same way. That's why I went into horticulture. You learn all the secret potions and the secret handshake, and you join the secret plant society to be able to grow plants that nobody else can. So we think there's all this magic knowledge and magic information or a magic potion that we can put our plants or something we can do that makes us better than everybody else. And it turns out in hindsight now, after gardening for 50 plus years, that a lot of times we were worse off by doing things that we told each other to do. And that's what we're doing right now with the crepe myrtles. And so we have a really big issue going on. We didn't invent it. This is been going on since the beginning of gardening. And so we have learned how to grow every plant from all over the world. And we got greenhouses, we've got special soils, we've got special fertilizers. We can build you a bed to suit any plant that you want to grow. But the problem is horticulture has forever now focused on the individual plants, not the ecosystem, not the habitat, not the prairie, not the field. We literally are growing trees instead of forest. And that seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like it made it special because we literally could figure out how to grow every single plant. The problem is when you're focusing on one single plant, you're not focusing on the plant next to it, or the rest of the bed, or the rest of the yard, or the rest of the neighborhood, or the rest of the town, the city, the ecosystem, the eco region, the state. And so we have really made a mistake in overly focusing on growing individual plants. And yeah, we know how to grow them spectacularly. We have bred flowers to be things that nature never intended them. Unfortunately, many of our flowers were bred to be show flowers to put in a vase, to go into a competition, to win a blue ribbon, without thinking about how we're affecting the rest of the world while we're doing it. It was to do anything to get the most perfect flower or the most perfect fruit or the most perfect vegetable to those competitions. And that's the way breeders approached it. So pretty much anything that we've introduced into horticulture for the last several hundred years have been bred to be abnormal, not what nature intended, extra petals, unnatural colors, larger sizes. Um, it's just the way it worked, and it's something we inherited, and it's been going on for a long time. But in hindsight, it wasn't the right thing to do. In fact, it's probably completely the wrong thing to do because a lot of these show flowers that were developed to be display cut flowers are not good garden flowers, and so we're ruining gardening by introducing something. I don't care how spectacular it is. All flowers are beautiful in its own way. Matter of fact, in the rose world, I remember it was kind of a joke that when people first got into roses, they would grow hybrid tea roses with long stems and giant flowers. And in midlife, they'd be growing grandifloras and floribundas. And then later on in life, they'd be growing shrub roses. And by the time they got to be old women or old men, they were growing wild roses with five single petals, thinking that was the most beautiful roses that ever existed. And so, at some point in time, we're enamored by the really showy, large flowers and anything we can do to grow them. But in hindsight, we really need to look at garden performance first and the whole system around it to see whether we should be growing them or not. So it brings up a really interesting conundrum. You think about botanical gardens, or any display garden for that matter. You think about Master Gardener demonstration gardens. Is it our job to show people plants that they can't grow, like going to visit Disney, uh, or to show them plants that they can grow? And there's two different philosophies on that. A lot of people think that a botanical garden should show people completely abnormal, unusual things that they can't do at home, and that's why they're going to pay money to go see it. And then other people say, no, it's our job to show what they can go replicate at home. And so, I get it. I've been in both camps. In hindsight, I think it's more important that we show people what they can do at home with the resources they have available, and preferably the fewer resources, the better. I mentioned the Tyler Rose Garden, and that's a good example with and it doesn't matter what public garden it is. A lot of Dallas Arboretum is a prime example. We're looking at spending millions and millions of dollars for display gardens. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to pull off a tulip display or a fall mum display for plants that are pulled up and thrown away. Entire boxes of bulbs dumped into a single hole for an annual display to make it look like that clump has been there a long time. So yeah, we have the technology. We know the horticulture to do fake gardens, but that's what they are. I had somebody visiting just yesterday, and they were talking about going to England. I've been to England to the Chelsea Flower Show, the Hampton Court Flower Show. Well, those are completely fake displays. They're spectacular. They're incredible. They show off every aspect of horticulture, but just for a temporary show. And you know what? Life is temporary enough without getting us down to a single week or a single day. We need plants that know how to persist. We need systems that will outlast us. And it's always been about how pretty we can make this look today or this year. But it's a new day in the gardening world. We literally need to pay attention where we live, what ecosystem we live in, what rainfall we get. I remember when I was on uh, an early xeriscape committee there in San Antonio, I would tell them frequently there will be a time when they won't let us use rainfall. I mean, they won't let us use irrigation for anything um, except industry and household use and sinks and toilets and car washes and manufacturing, that we all need to learn to be able to cultivate plants using rainfall alone. And certainly that's a wide range. And so in El Paso, we're looking at almost 6 inches of rainfall. In Beaumont, Port Arthur, almost 60 inches of rainfall. San Antonio, maybe 25 inches. Where my home is, maybe 50 inches. And so we all try to grow the same plants from all over the world, from all different soils, from all different systems that require all different amounts of irrigation in the same landscape. Most of the time that weren't didn't evolve to even grow there at all. And so we need to look at the big picture and start focusing on the forests instead of the trees. We need to match our gardens to the local ecosystem, to the local rainfalls, to the local birds, bees, and pollinators that are there and help support those systems. And so, we've got a problem. And I always thought gardeners were like the best people on earth, and they mean to be. I mean, we always made things pretty. We took chicken poo and made it into chicken salad, and we were famous for that. But in hindsight, there's a bit of a problem. There are some people making out gardeners to be the bad guys now, and they're not all incorrect because, like it or not, we've been complicit with what's going on. And so I like to tell people that what we call gardening should have never been about doing everything possible at all costs to make exotic plants grow, ignoring threats to all other resources and native species. And so if we're going to use up the water and we're going to use insecticides and pesticides and ship plants from all over the world and make plants grow in our areas that aren't supposed to be growing, we're doing the wrong thing. That means somebody taught us wrong. We learned it wrong. We read it wrong. And so we literally are going to have to step back and readjust and refocus if we want gardening to continue into the future. And some people get scared. Oh my gosh, Greg's kind of trying to take our plants away. No, we're always going to have plants. We're always going to have art. We're always going to have food. You're still going to be able to do cut flowers. You're still going to be able to do yard art. But we got to look at the big picture, not the individual focus on what our favorite color and our favorite plant and how we want our garden to look to everybody else and to feel special because we can do something because other people that other people can't. We need to show everybody what they can do. Dr. Parsons always said, if there's something that's really good, you need to share it with everybody else. Don't keep it to yourself. And so you can see I like to talk a lot, but I also like to write. So if you want to follow along, I write a weekly column every week that goes out to about 100 different places, including the Tyler Morning Telegraph, and I reprint those articles. I repost them on my Facebook page at Greg Grant Gardens. So if you're on Facebook, I had two Facebook pages, Greg Grant Gardens and Pine Paws and Pocket Prairies. Also put that usually weekly column is usually published on my blog page at arbogate.com. I do a monthly blog called Greg's Ramblings. And I've been writing for Texas Gardener Magazine now for over a quarter of a century in a column called In Greg's Garden. And so just finished up on one on turtles that'll be out this summer. And then, of course, did some books, The Rose Rustlers, Heirloom Gardening in the South, Texas Fruit and Vegetable Garden, Texas Home Landscape, and those are all available from Amazon. And my master gardeners sell those books at our events to raise scholarship for money for horticulture students at Texas A&M and Stephen F. Austin University. So I'm sure I've stimulated some questions, maybe made somebody mad. I hope I didn't. But, I did all these things. So, if anybody's going to take the blame for both doing it and teaching it, I will certainly do that. And so that's the end of my talk. And if you got any questions, I'll be happy to entertain those.
Well, Greg, I can tell you that you certainly stimulated a lot of conversations, even among the host. Great presentation. Thank you so much. If you have a question for Greg, please put it in the Q&A box. If you don't see the Q&A button on your screen right away, just click on the little more button with the three dots and you'll be able to see it pop up. We do have some questions. One is from Master Gardener. She said, on a crepe myrtle that has not been topped, those suckers that were coming off at the base, should they be removed if that happens?
Of course, I tell you all these rules, and we teach rules all the time. But the number one rule is your landscape, your plant. You do what you want. And nobody's going to come write you a ticket. Yes, I do remove those suckers. Of course, anytime you damage the base of a crepe myrtle, even if you don't top it, if you bump it with the lawnmower, if you hit it with the weed eater, it will cause it to sucker and sprout. Some cultivars are more prone to sprouting. But when you cut those off there, you need to do your best to cut it off as smooth with the trunk as you can, because if you leave a little stub there, it's going to keep resprouting. But over time, they'll get to be few and fewer sprouts if you do a good job of cutting those off there and avoiding damaging it with weed eaters and lawnmowers. So yeah, I take those off, but it's your choice. If you want to grow it as a smooth multi-trunk tree, then we don't want to see those suckers there. There are some cultivars, the dwarfs and semi-dwarfs, that I cut to the ground every year and grow as a mass shrub. Just like they might do butterfly bushes in the north and Europe, they make a great woody perennial. And so in that case, I want all those suckers there, and I've deadhead them a couple of times during the year just by shearing them off. But the treetops, I do remove the suckers. Sorry to ramble on.
No, no, no. That's all great information. And I just love the way that you have that different perspectives on things than we normally look at some issues. So thank you for that. Um, we have comment from one master gardener that she just said amen
No,
to everything you
thank
said.
you.
So you have a lot of people behind you going, yes,
Yeah,
this is,
don't feel bad. I mean, you all have a choice, and so I'm just telling you what my choice is now.
oh, that's great. We appreciate it. You've been around a while doing this a while, so we appreciate that. A question from another participant. She says, if I had to pick one native plant to include in my garden, what would that be? What would your choice be?
It depends where you are, and so Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, a native Salvia farinaceae is a good native plant because you'll get butterflies, you get bees. It's native literally to you know Texas Hill Country and limestone soils. San Antonio, South Texas, it's hard to beat. Esperanza or Tacoma stands. We have major issues with the monarch butterfly, and so over you couldn't go wrong with any native Asclepias. But that's the beauty of it. You still there are many, 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 many kinds of native plants. You can still pick. You can still be individuals. You can still pick favorite colors. You can still do combinations. You can still do perennial borders. And so, I hate telling people what to do, but it's a matter of fact. I'm sitting there looking on my screen a picture of Henry Dilberg's salvia with a zebra swallowtail butterfly on it, and so that obviously one of my favorites. But any native, and that's just it. We gardeners, and I get it. We pick the prettiest thing we can possibly get, the showiest version we can. But everything in nature is not showy, and every butterfly is not showy, and every bird's not showy, and every bee's not showy. And so we need as much diversity as possible. So my hope is everybody will grow, something different.
I love that. My nephew made me a table, a coffee table with vines and all that because he knew I liked gardening. And three of them had all these beautiful vines. And then the other one of them has nothing on it. And I'm like, what did you do there? And he said, nature is not symmetrical. And I thought that
Good.
was a great
That's
answer.
cool. Yep. This reminds me of Japanese floral design, putting in dead leaves or broken stems.
I like that. Yes. All right. Another question. How can you help a crepe myrtle recover from drought and pruning damage?
The question is, how can you help a crepe myrtle recover from drought and pruning damage? You know, a lot of them are just so marred by years of pruning and scars and stubs and whatnot that literally you can cut a crepe myrtle to the ground and it will sprout back. You're not going to kill it from cutting it back. It will sprout back with multiple trunks. You give it 1 year, just letting the whole thing grow. The second year, you go in there and pick out your trunks and immediately be natural looking again. And so now, more often than not in Texas, about every 30 years or even less here recently, you get some freeze damage on certain cultivars of crepe myrtle. And so when you got bad freeze damage, or if you had bad drought or mutilation, which is pretty common these days, I'd literally cut it to the ground and start over. You can't kill a crepe myrtle from cutting it down. You can't even kill a crepe myrtle from digging it up and moving it because every root you leave in the ground will sprout into another crepe myrtle tree. And so you just give it 1 year, they'll flush back, and you start it over. It's like starting over with a 15-gallon crepe myrtle the first year.
Love that. Hope. A question about marigolds. If we shouldn't plant marigolds in spring because of spider mites, is there a good replacement to help with pests? I assume they're talking about another plant that might help repel
I have
pests.
never found any companion plant that repelled pest enough that it was worth the idea of adding competition. So if you think about vegetables, none of these vegetables that we grow are wild in their wild form. They're all developed to be far more than nature intended. So they don't work good in a combination because it doesn't matter if you have marigolds or Bermuda grass or Johnson grass, they're all just competition for your vegetable plant. And so I love mixtures of gardens like you'd have a potager garden in Europe. But they're not, it's there for beauty and diversity, and maybe you're attracting pollinators, not to control insects. And so you're not going to, in my experience, control any insects by planting a companion plant. And believe me, I grew up planting garlic around every rose bush and following everything into my Rodell book, but I couldn't tell any of it made any difference. And so do plant other things, but not for pest control.
Good to know. All right, another comment. Greg, I love the passion. Could you recommend a couple of books for someone that has never done any garden? This person said they've never grown anything, but they would like to learn. What are some good basic books?
When I started my career, what is it, 40 years ago or so, we basically had no gardening books for Texas. We had to glean through northern books and European books that just literally weren't correct for us at all. And then Neil Sperry came out with his first gardening book, and it's been revised several times. And Neil's older than I am, but he's still going at it. And his all around book for Texas, which we cover a little bit of everything from perennials to tropicals to bulbs to shrubs to fruit vegetables. That would be a good place for a beginning gardener to start just gardening in Texas. And Neil grew up with a dad uh, was in agriculture and biology, and then he was trained in extension as a specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife, and so he has good science research based background. So that I'd start with Neil's book, and then now we literally have dozens and dozens of gardening books written just for Texas. And so once you get into herbs or vegetables or fruits or flowers, uh, then you've got something very specific to go to. But for a general gardening book, I'd start with Neil Sperry.
Great. I have that one. What is the most effective way to remove heavenly bamboo? Oh, yikes.
You know, Nandine, both my grandmothers had Nandinas at their houses, and I've got a little bit of it scattered. I fight invasive plants every day. I've got 50 acres. Of course, Chinese privet is our biggest invasive up here. But, bamboo, excuse me, the Nandina is a long-lived shrub, so they essentially don't die. Uh, and so what you're looking at is, well, what I do is I cut them back to the ground. So anytime you have something that seeds out at all, whether it be a ligustrum or an andina, first thing you do is cut it to the ground and let it resprout. And what that does is that eliminates its potential to make any more seed for the birds to spread around. And it also gets it below your knees. So when you're going to have to bring out some herbicide, which I do for invasive species, I use Remedy or Triclopyr herbicide, and I just treat just that foliage on the low growing plant. If it was something you were cutting down that had a trunk, you can use a triclopyr and vegetable oil at 25% to 75%. Or if you're a cut surface, you can literally paint that. But you got to be really careful because that herbicide doesn't know the difference between your flowers, your good shrubs, your bad shrubs, invasive shrubs, good trees. And so I say triclopyr herbicide. Or if you just at a box store, anything that they sell for that says brush killer is generally some combination of triclopyr.
Okay, great.
Don't get anywhere near anything you don't want dead because you can mess up.
Thank you. This is, I'm sure, a question that's common to many. I'm curious if there's a solution to removing the little oak shoots that appear at the base of oak trees and seem to take over the lawn.
Unfortunately, 90% of the time when we're looking at live oaks doing that, they're suckers from the root system. And so, in other words, if you put herbicide on those little sprouts, you're treating the entire tree with a herbicide. And so, occasionally in East Texas, you got a lawn, you may have a red oak or a white oak, and you have seedlings pop up. But if you're dealing with a live oak, it's almost always seedlings. And it goes back to the way live oaks grow in the wild. And so everybody wants this, multi-trunk tree that you limb up. Well, in the wild, they grow in these mottes that sucker, and the limbs come down and make more trees. And so they're solid stands that you can't even walk through because that's the way they grow naturally. And so, unfortunately, there's not a herbicide way or a chemical to put on those live oak sprouts. But I tell you some ways that I've seen it done is where you just literally use the live oak sprouts as a ground cover or a shrub under there. You shear them, and I've seen them where they look like boxwood or dwarf yaupon sheared under there, including undulating patterns, box patterns. I do that with a yaupon holly at home the same way, that's suckered profusely, and I keep it sheared under there. So it looks like two different shrubs. It looks like a dwarf yaupon under a standard yaupon, and it's just the suckers and the sprouts because I can't use herbicide on it because they're coming from the parent plant. There are other people that hide it with other ground covers, but at some point you're going to have to shear them because it's going to grow taller because it literally wants to make multiple trees under there.
Great idea. I hadn't thought about shaping them. That's good. This person says, not a question, just keep saying what you said, ecosystems and working with nature.
Thank you very much.
Big proponent there. All right. Any suggestions on a plant or shrubbery to grow in a very large container in the backyard that has quite a bit of shade due to the neighbor's tree canopy?
Yeah, unfortunately, when you get to shade, you lose about 85 or 95% of the traditional flowering plants. Now, if you're just looking for annual color, you got things like impatiens and coleus and Persian shield, and there are a number of things that you can grow. Just caladiums are a good example. If you're looking for something permanent, there are not as many options. Texas gold columbine tolerates shade. You got lots of different ferns. Wood fern, which is native in Texas, actually does an acid soil, alkaline soil, sun, shade. So that's an option. Turk's cap is an amazing perennial that's native to Texas. It grows in sun, shade, wet, dry, acid, alkaline. It just has a little bit different habit in the shade than it does the sun. But you can shear it, blooms on new growth. You can shape it any way you want. So that's an option too.
Okay, very good. One of our master gardeners says very refreshing perspectives. Thank you very much. Next question. This is something that they've heard, a rumor. Can you use or should you use vermiculite as a topper when planting seeds to help prevent damping off? Is that accurate?
That it's kind of classic horticulture where it's based on bits and pieces of correct information. So vermiculite in the horticulture world, you can divide up those things that hold moisture, soil amendments that hold moisture, and those that add air to provide drainage. So the things that hold more water would be vermiculite, peat moss, clay in the soil world. The things that give you aeration and better drainage would be sand and perlite and what else? Sand. Those are the most classic examples to add air. Uh, Pine bark, composted pine bark is looser. And so when you're looking at damping off, that's caused by too much moisture. And so even though vermiculite added over the top of the seedlings will keep the soil from crusting and it'll hold moisture to give you better germination and keep those seedlings from drying out, and it is sterile, it would actually sort of hold more moisture and maybe increase the chances of getting damping off. So in other words, if you do it correctly, because it's sterile and you don't overwater it, it might be perfect. And a lot of places that grow seeds do that, or they use seedling mixes that have vermiculite in there. But if you're not careful, it's going to hold more moisture for a longer period of time, and you could actually increase damping off. And so you just got to be really careful and know that it's holding more water.
Good, thank you. This person says they are looking to help a school plant a tree for kinder students. Can you think of a native that would grow well with the kids and have the most growth over time? So I think that they're looking at something that could make a big impact on them from now, that she says, through eighth grade.
You can pretty much write it in your book that the faster a tree grows, the faster it dies. So the fast growing trees are shorter lived, the slower growing trees are longer lived. And so we're looking at some trees that may only live 10 or 15 years, and we've got other trees like Montezuma cypress that are going to live 1,000 or 1,500 years. And so you got to be really careful. If your focus is on having it grow fast, you don't want those kids coming back as an adult to show their child in school, here's where we planted a tree, but it's dead and gone because we chose a really fast growing tree. And so those fast growing trees like willows and ashes and that sort of thing are not going to last that long. So you're much better to pick something like a Monterey oak or a Shumard red oak or a Montezuma cypress and plant it at the right time of year. Teach about it. Teach this is why it does grow slower. Mulch it, keep the grass from growing around there. Water it during June, July, and August during the summertime, and then have it live for centuries instead of years. Because aiming for and I get this all the time. People say, "I want fast growing." Well, it's just going to die. Well, I don't care because I'm not going to live that long. Well, do you really want somebody to buy your house where your tree crashes and falls on the house and you were responsible for that, or you're in there in your old age in a wheelchair and you can't get out of the house because your own weak-wooded, fast-growing tree fell on the house? So be careful about just focusing on fast growth because that'll end you up in the wrong camp every time.
A great perspective. We just have a minute or so left, so I am going to get to what I can. First of all, a comment from one of our other experts locally. He says, thanks for the shout out to growing forests instead of individual trees. He says in San Antonio, so many large trees have died over the last few years with drought and freeze damage that many homeowners have lost their single shade trees. And he says he's not seeing nearly enough replacements. But he has a question. When's the best time to plant new trees? And what encouragement do you offer for folks who get them over fear of when to get them started, to get over that fear?
Okay.
When do I start?
It's just a good rule for gardening in Texas. When it comes to woody plants, which would include all your shade trees, and doesn't matter if it's small, medium, large tree, fall is the best time to plant. Winter is second best, spring is third best, and summer is the worst. And so in my career, most fall planted trees, of course, I'm in a higher rainfall area, but it's even more exacerbated for you guys. Most fall planted trees can make it through the first summer without irrigation. Now, for you, probably not. Almost every spring planted tree is going to die the first summer without irrigation. And so we have mild enough winters in Texas that we get root growth during the wintertime. Traditionally, it's also when we get moisture. Now, here lately, we just having some crazy years. So we're in the middle of a drought, even in East Texas right now with burn ban and all that. So you don't want dry fall and winter and spring in Texas, because if you have your traditional dry summer, then you get a 2011 kind of drought. But fall is best, winter is second best, spring third best, summer worst. Now, if it's a bare root tree, you're planting a fruit tree, a lot of times those aren't available till middle or late winter, and you don't have a choice. But if it's a container grown tree, aim for the fall, and that gives you your full complement of our traditional moisture and our cooler temperatures to get a root system established before summertime. And then certainly mulch it. That keeps the root warmer during the wintertime, cooler during the summertime, helps prevent competition from weed growth. And it also keeps you from bumping it with weed eaters and lawnmowers or cars and that sort of thing. And that's the best way to do it. So everybody should plant trees where they're appropriate. If not, certainly, prairies, and there are lots of open spaces and grasslands and other things other than forest in Texas that we need to cultivate as well.
Okay. It is 10, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question because that's
Sure.
the last one. This person is wanting a plant recommendation for privacy in their backyard.
It's it depends how tall you're looking at. In every county, every place that has a master gardener program in the county horticulturist has a recommended plant list for that county. And so depending on where you are and how tall you want it to be, it's hard to go wrong with things like standard Yopon holly, which is not going to die. It's going to be thick and dense and sucker and fill in. Neil Sperry loves Nellie R. Stevens, which is actually the Asian holly, but gives you a big privacy hedge as well. But check in locally to get the recommended plant list and go to the height of shrub that you want, and then make sure that that's something that you wanted. I'm sure evergreen. But here I can't go wrong with Yopon holly for a permanent hedge. The tree top, not the dwarf top, the standard.
And if you happen to be local, the person answering that question, again, you can go to the gardening library on our homepage, Bexar County Master Gardener homepage. Lots of information there. Greg, fantastic presentation and answers. Thank you so much. We are so fortunate to have you.
Appreciate you having me.
Great way to kick off our first day. So that's it for our first session. Our next workshop was going to cover how you can still have a nice landscape in the middle of drought. Yes, that is possible. So we will begin promptly at 10:30, and we hope to see you back then. Thanks, everybody. Oh, and this is the QR code for the survey. If you would please take just a minute. It will take just a moment to answer the survey, answer a couple of questions about the session, and you're really going to help us out. So if you would do that, we would be most appreciative. Thank you. We'll see you at 10:30.